Well, welcome back. It's been a while since Genesis Collective has engaged in our church planting conversations. But today is pretty exciting, I have to be honest, because we are beginning a multi-week journey on reimagining leadership. You know, around here there are a lot of men who have been stuck in the 60s and the 70s. Their hairline is receding, they've got ponytails, they're wearing Hawaiian shirts that are stretched at the belly, they're listening to their 60s and 70s music. Their stories are of yesteryear. In fact, they say you can know the best years of a man's life by the clothes that he wears. Those are the years that he loved, and he imagines himself engaged in those times still. Well, we want to have the conversation around reimagining leaders. Steve Turner said, the English poet said, these are the good old days, just you wait and see. Because we grow with affection to the now. In fact, Jesus, speaking about wine and wineskin, says that we want the old is better. But what if the old isn't going to suffice for the new day? We're in COVID. We've had to wrestle through the trauma and tragedy of George Floyd. And we're coping with economic instability and political change. What does it look like today? What does it look like to be a leader? Jesus representing leader today. So we use a 4-part matrix. We ask the question, what is biblically essential? We want to remain within the orthodoxy of Scripture, but sometimes we've got to change the lens and read the text just a little differently. Secondly, we want to be culturally sensitive. As we've described, the cultural days have shifted dramatically, and the hour in which we live has surprised us. Who would have said 4 or 5 months ago that we would be doing virtual church? So the horrific thought of doing church through a screen, we would have all been staggered in disbelief and be revolted by. But we're in those days. Thirdly, we do want to live prophetically compelling. What does the future look like? What is God calling us to live like and proclaim like? And then fourthly, obviously, we want to live in a way that's personally authentic. Now, Walter Brueggemann, he said this. He said that imagination is a danger. Thus, any totalitarian regime is frightened by the artist. It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the mystery and the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing alternative futures to the single one the king wants to urge as the only thinkable one. The way we do church as if it's a solid, unchanging reality just is not true anymore. You and I know that. The world in which we live and the way in which we're having to lead is going through immeasurable changes. He goes on to say the gospel is a very dangerous idea, Brueggemann does. We have to see how much of that dangerous idea we can perform in our own lives. There is nothing innocuous or safe about the gospel. Jesus did not get crucified because he was a nice man. And I think in the 80s and the 90s, when times were different, the socio-political and economic world that we lived in had an element of stability to it. I think it crafted a picture of this nice, pleasant, pastoral person. And we tried to choose leaders like that, reflect a leadership model like that. Even the picture of Jesus we gave was kind of a nice guy. But the days in which we live have tumbleweeded that idea, and it's just not true. And then lastly, he says the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture and nourish and evoke consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. Andy Crouch introduced all of us to the idea about 9-10 weeks ago that it could be we're facing a blizzard, a few weeks of craziness, but then life will turn to normal and we just have to hang in there and we have to offer a survival model of leadership. But what if, he said, if it's not a blizzard, what if it's a winter of multiple months of severe weather conditions where we have to kind of scrum down in our homes and protect ourselves and yet feed ourselves? And it required another expression and model and style of leadership. And in our case, with our little community, the sheer concern of our community being scattered. We have so many students in our little bitty community, and they had to go home because colleges shut down. Now, how do we lead them in Alaska and Baltimore and Arizona and Colorado? How do we love and lead them when our contact is virtual? It became such an interesting response required to such unexpected realities. And then the third, he said, but it might even be a mini ice age, much longer, 2 or 3 years. And what do we do then if we have to remain virtual during all of that time? So what I've done is I've looked and am looking at the idea of reimagined leadership. Think for a moment with me, if you will, how God raised Moses up. And Moses was phenomenal at leading God's people out of slavery, out of Egypt, through the wilderness, the miracles, the leadership, the challenges, the struggles. But remember when he stood on top of the hill and looked at the promised land, and God said, you're not going in there. But the pain he experienced because he could lead them out, but he couldn't lead them in. Why couldn't he lead them in? What did Joshua know that Moses did not have? And I've wondered, what model of leadership did Joshua have to live out to take people in and fight the giants in the land and the cities and the new challenges that weren't similar at all to Moses' challenges, and to lead the people into that space? So think of David and Solomon. David, as we know, was one of God's great warrior leaders, a shepherd of his people, a man after God's own heart. But he wanted to build a temple, and God said, no, you won't do it. Your hands are stained with blood, but your son will. The proverb, the poem writing king got to build the temple. You see, leadership had to be reimagined. Leadership had to be re-expressed. So think of Deborah, and we'll talk one whole session about Deborah. But when she writes of herself, she says, I, Deborah, a mother in Israel. That's how she saw herself. And yet God said, no, I want you to be a prophet. I want you to be a judge or a leader. I want you to be a co-commander in my army to lead my people into battle. Here was this woman who was happy to be a stay-at-home mom, but yet God raised her up at that time. I suppose we could say that about an Indira Gandhi or a Margaret Thatcher. I was reading up with curiosity about this young Finnish Prime Minister who's 34 years old. That's the age of my oldest daughter. Yes, she is Prime Minister of her country. Or the 39-year-old woman Prime Minister of New Zealand. Wow. We would never have said that just a few years ago. These are such interesting times. I want to invite you into the storytelling. I want you to invite you in. This is not a closed textbook. Read the book, study the notes, write the exam. This is an open book of exploration and discovery and ideation. What does it need to look like for us to lead at these times, these days, be prophetic and advance the kingdom? Hope you enjoy it. We will enjoy presenting it. See you soon.